morning, Australia. You're on the show on Power TV Australia that we have called Switched on IT. Today on this show, we have got two international guests with us, and you actually met them last week. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Barry.
And you're in Sydney.
That's right.
And Ray, we have with us from the United States. Good morning, Ray, although it's not morning for you, is it?
Good afternoon over here.
Yes, okay. Now, this show today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, correct?
That's right.
Yep. Okay, now I'm going to open this up and just let Doug and Ray chat about this. Doug, maybe if you can just begin by telling us a little bit about your experience in cybersecurity, and I'll just jump in every now and then to keep the conversation going.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Oz Hosting is a business that provides, I guess, the sort of the basic back-end IT needs of literally thousands and thousands of businesses. So every day, myself and the team that I'm working with are talking to business owners all around Australia, and we've got customers, very often Australians, operating out of overseas areas as well. And we do bump into a lot of cybercrime and security issues that they're experiencing, and so we're trying to help them with these matters all the time. And I'd have to say, you know, our exposure as a business to them has been very much at the coalface, hearing from customers that will contact us and say, hey, you know, something dreadful has happened. What can we do about it? So it's become a very important topic for us, and we're trying to do everything that we can to help our customer base be a lot more resistant to the very common threats that are out there. And the sort of threats that we're bumping into, and again, I'd stress this is literally on a daily basis. You know, we had a customer yesterday who came to us, and they had an issue with their email. The email was bouncing, and we actually host their email. So this was one of those situations where we then looked at their domain name. The domain name had been put on some blacklists. So that means even though the mail is being sent from our mail server, it was still going to junk and being rejected by some of the spam filtering systems out there. And the intriguing thing that was behind it, because they were looking at this as being a mail issue, it was actually the reputation of their domain. And what had happened was that their website had been compromised. There was some malware in it. It was basically spamming the world and probably promoting, you know, Viagra or some other wonderful pharmaceutical product. And that had then been tripping off spam filtering triggers all around the world, and spam filters were then starting to block their legitimate email coming from their legitimate mail server. So that's just one example of the things that we bump into every day. So then we went back to that client and assisted them with their website security and encouraged them to have a, you know, we're not the developer of the website, we don't own the code, so we had to help them get a scan of that and figure out where it was and take some action. So literally every day we're talking to people about cybersecurity events.
Ray, you have some experience in this as well. You were telling me before that that we're actually looking at you on an Australian server. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is one of the ways in which I think businesses can protect themselves, and actually individuals generally, and small business owners who I tend to talk to. You know, I want to make sure they're protecting themselves when they're on public internet access. So if you're at a cafe, if you're in some way, shape, or form on another internet access point that is not your own network, one that you don't own and control, you should do what's called a VPN, a virtual private network. And you don't have to understand how this works, but the idea is that you're connecting point to point through what they call a tunnel. A VPN is basically a tunnel between 2 points, so that your traffic, your information isn't leaking out to the world. And so I just, for fun, today, for the recording, I decided I would be in the same country as you. So I went ahead and connected through the VPN. And I use a tool called TunnelBear. And it's a fantastic little tool that is put on your smartphone, on your laptop computer, and you can just basically toggle it on and off. And what it does is it secures the data that you transit between yourself and the point that you're trying to connect to, and in this case, any website that you're browsing to, and so on and so forth. And this just keeps your data a little bit more secure. It's not foolproof, but it's certainly a wonderful additional benefit that you're not going to a cafe and sharing all of the information that you are transiting over the internet at a public Wi-Fi or even at a client location to them.
Doug, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting approach, and we do advise people to use VPNs in certain circumstances, Ray. And it's interesting, your comments about the individual or the company's control over the networks that they're using, because that is something that people kind of take for granted in a way, and they feel as though, well, if I'm on a network, the network's got to be okay. I have to log into my laptop, I have to maybe log into my email, but they don't think about the network they're on when they're performing those actions. And those networks can be the key point of vulnerability for the individual. So, Barry, if it's okay, can I just talk about a law firm that I wish, one of our customers again, that I wish knew a little bit more about VPNs and network security.
Yes.
So we've got, it's an immigration law firm. The practice manager travels quite a bit, I think, through Southeast Asia. And I actually don't know, where this event actually happened, but the practice manager also in her role as the practice manager signs off on some quite significant bank transfers to different entities around the world. So it's not uncommon for the accounting team to see requests for bank transfers coming through from the practice manager. Now, clearly the practice manager was travelling a lot, was using maybe airport or hotel or shopping mall Wi-Fi, and doing her regular work as a practice manager for the law firm using free Wi-Fi. And it seems that her laptop was compromised. That meant that the bad actor, shall we call him, the bad actor was able to get into the laptop, and if the laptop was on a network but dormant, once they got in through that connection, wherever that practice manager went and put the laptop online, they were able to get into it. So this is what they did. They read the emails back and forth from that practice manager, worked out who all the other staff in the practice were, what their roles were. There's 30 or 40 staff in this practice. And then they started sending emails purportedly from the practice manager, from her mailbox, to people in the accounts team, requesting a bank transfer to happen. It was about $140,000 US, and this wasn't unusual. And then they started to amp up the urgency of it, saying, that the partner / owner of the business, he wants this done by close of business today. And it was always from the practice manager, using the practice manager's signature in the email. And then a couple of people on the accounts team, one of them had, I think it was a WhatsApp, but it was just some sort of instant messaging service that she was using, because she was a personal friend of the practice manager. And then she contacted the practice manager through the instant messaging service and said, hey, what's all this about all these, this urgent bank transfer that we've got to process? And then the practice manager, through the social media, went back and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then the practice manager went through and looked at her sent folder, and the emails that the accounts person was referring to were not in the sent folder. So they'd been smart enough to delete them out of the sent folder as well, so you can hard delete an email. And so then the practice manager went back to the accounts team and said, well, there's no evidence of these. And then the accounts person said, look, I'll just send it to you. I'll just forward back or reply to one of these emails, and then you'll see the thread in the trail. And she did that, and that's when the practice manager was, had the aha moment and realised that somebody's been either inside her email account or inside her laptop. Now, we were able to establish to our client satisfaction that her mailbox itself, the password hadn't been compromised. Because if the password to the mailbox had been compromised, that would then mean that they would have more than likely changed it, and that would have then disabled her email access to her smartphone and any other devices that she's got. So it really looked like whenever she was online, they were able to, the attack vector, as they call it, was her device. It was the device that was compromised, and so they could just get in there and launch the email, launch Outlook, and just go in and start sending emails. So naturally, they did catch it. They didn't process the transfer. It was very, very close, and then obviously they were able to do they completely rebuilt that laptop. They just deleted everything on it, and then started again, and I think put some more robust endpoint security on it. But that's another example of the kind of security breaches that can happen out there. And as I say, these are happening every day.
Wow. Ray, tell us some of your experiences.
Yeah, so can we pause 1 second? Can we cut this out? Okay, I just need to change batteries. My laptop, for some reason, just told me that the battery is going to die, and I realized that I did not have it plugged in, and now it's plugged in.
It's a good thing we're not live.
Yes, exactly. I was like, I'm waiting for Doug to finish so that I could say that.
Yeah.
I was like, don't die, don't die. Okay. All right. So I used to.
So that's a good example of.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead, Doug. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say. So that's to Ray's point, that's an example of why a VPN is a great idea, or better network security. And I think with this particular client, I'd be saying to them, don't use those free Wi-Fis if you can. Take your mobile phone with you, have a good data plan, and toggle to your mobile phone and use the network, a trusted network from your mobile phone provider, rather than the free Wi-Fi services that are out there.
Oh, so they were using a free Wi-Fi service?
Well, we know that they do.
Right.
And standard practice for the practice manager was just to use whatever Wi-Fi connection was available. And rarely would she have used the mobile phone and toggled that to the laptop and used the data availability of the mobile phone, the data pack of that. And she didn't have the VPN, obviously.
No. Yeah. Right.
No, having worked at a law firm managing these kinds of technology issues, I can fully relate to Doug's story about managing lawyers and administrative staff, as well as our principals, the principal attorneys, and their expectations about convenience over security and the ability to get work done in a mobile environment and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if you compromise your client's data, you're in a far worse place than if you were to be less convenient about accessing that data and being less responsive, therefore, to your client, right? So, and there are just such simple things you can do. I mean, I think it starts off with a little bit of what Doug was intimating here, which is that having good account management, right? You want to make sure that you are creating appropriate user account level and administrative level management with regard to access to everything in your business, so that you're able to make sure that people are not having access to things that they just don't need to have access to. And while there might be various laws for or against particular types of access to things, it's just good practice to make sure that you have a plan in place, a written document that says, this is, for this role, this is the access to these tools. For this role, these are the access to these tools. And to regularly, obviously, check those things to make sure that people have them or don't have them appropriately. Like you might say to someone, oh, well, something's happening in the business, so you might have temporary access to something, and then you leave that access there. And it's not about worrying about that particular person doing something wrong with it. It's that they are now a larger footprint for hackers and criminals to be able to access that data inappropriately. So you really want to have good account access control measurements put into place in the business. And additionally, I would just note that password managers are your friend. I'll explain a little bit about public and private keys for this purpose and kind of demystifying some of this for us all. So a public key is something like a username. So you have lots of usernames. It could be your email address. It could be a series of letters and numbers that are combined, and you use that for being able to log into services, right? So you might use your email address to log into your email server, and then a password is what we call a private key. So we have a public key and a private key. Now, think of your public key as a password, just like you think about your private key or your password as a password. They're all passwords. So what you need to do is you need to control access to these public and private keys respective to how much exposure you want. So for example, I might have some financial accounts, and that public key I do not want to be the same as, say, my social media profile usernames on the internet, right? I don't want a hacker to go around, if he gets my password to my Twitter account, for example, I don't want him going around and checking to see if that same username is to my bank account and to my accounting service that might be also online. So hackers do that. They look for your username, that public key, which is that first opportunity for them to say, oh, you know what? I hacked into your email. I was able to intervene and then take some of that data, and now I'm going to go around and look for all the other big services that are out there, QuickBooks and Xero and FreshBooks and so on and so forth, and see if that same username or email, kicks me back a password, reject, and then therefore maybe a password reset link, and now sends that to me. So just something as simple as creating variety among your username gives you a strong amount of security against that kind of attack. And so I think user management, user access management, creating different usernames and then of course having good passwords. And good passwords are long passwords. It doesn't matter particularly what the combination is, but it's just letters, numbers, and symbols, and the longer the better. And then using password managers to be able to manage them. Gone are the days where you can remember all of your passwords. Gone are the days when you can just depend upon some clever moniker to be able to create passwords. You should have a password manager, and I'm happy to provide some of those options for you. And you go ahead and you use a password manager, because the ability to change them to long passwords are built into many of these password managers, and then you're able to manage them without even thinking about it, because you can't be hacked if you don't even know your own password.
Yeah, well, now I have lots of passwords in my computer, and I use a password manager, and I don't know how I would cope without using a password manager that simply sets up a really complicated password.
Absolutely.
Doug, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree with Ray, and you too, Barry, on the use of the password manager. Just do need to have so many logins. We end up with so many logins, and you cannot possibly stay secure when you're using the same password across all of them. But I'd have to say, my first-hand experience in dealing with business owners in Australia and the people that administer their systems, they love to, and they will tell us, oh, that's my password, we use that for everything.
Yeah,
now,
yes.
That is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And Ray, what you were saying firstly about the public key, private key, it is quite a dangerous step. The way in so many situations a business will allow a person to create a username and password, and the username will be their email address. I don't really agree with that. I think you should be allowed to make any username you like, and then create the username. Then that can't be guessed by anybody, and then you can create a password as well, and then you've got two keys in there that are both actually quite secure. So for an Oz hosting account, for example, we won't even accept an email address as the username, which does cause our customers a few issues, because at some point they always forget that their email address is not their username for logging into their Oz hosting account, and we do a lot of password inquiries, but it's secure being able to do that. Now, it's almost like you would struggle to name a large company that has got hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of clients and their client data on their systems that hasn't been hacked. If we talk about Dropbox or I think Sony Music, and there's just loads of them. Now, when those businesses have been compromised, one of the things that the bad actors have been able to get is the email address, which typically the username, and the password for that particular individual as well. Now, that obviously doesn't mean that they've just got access to that particular service that individual is using. But that individual uses their email address and that same password across multiple services. That is when that actor can then jump in and go, well, I've just picked up this email address and password from this person in Australia, for instance. What are the major banks in Australia? What online services do they have? And they might try to find a way in to that person's service. Now, if they've also, through their access to that particular service, got access to their email, if they then say, oh, look, I'll jump across and use this Gmail email address and the same password and see if that logs me into their email, then very quickly they would be able to find out potentially the account VSB and account number for that individual. They'd find out which banks they're using and have bank accounts with. They would be able to get an awful lot of information, and if that password is used consistently, then there is a real danger that person can be compromised, in terms of their finances, but also in terms of all the sorts of other personal information. So password managers, the only way you can have a lot of different passwords. Your point, Ray, is using the password manager. We'll never remember them without having a tool like that.
Too much debt? Fixed. Too much stress? Fixed. Too many hassles? Fixed. Central Liaison has helped thousands of Australians with too much debt. You have options, so call today on 0409 344 070.
Hi, this is Sarah and Bron showing off our height safety at Hip Pocket Toowoomba. Harnesses, roofers kits, anchor points, we have walls full. We can tag your gear too. Get the right gear for the right job. At Hip Pocket, we rock it.
Yeah, something that we all have to also be aware of is the fact that, if passwords are compromised, we need to have other security practices in place. Doug, over at Oz Hosting, what do you all do in terms of providing clients with security guidelines so that they're able to have good security practices in place, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, many times usernames and passwords are not the only level of security that they should have in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly one of the things that with our customers, we've got a range of services, and so very often they might have other parties assisting them with a particular service. So they might have their website hosting with us, they might have the website backup with us, they may have some website security services with us as well, and their email may be involved. Now, they may have an IT guy that helps them with their email. If that individual needs to get access, admin access to the email administration center, the control panel to the email, that business owner does not need to give the systems admin guy access to all the services. So the recommended best practice for us is to say to that business owner, hey, you've got your sysadmin, your IT guy, create a username and password for him as another admin to the Oz hosting system. Then jump into the Oz hosting system and then disable the access of that individual to all the other services apart from that one email service. And then you're able to winnow down the amount of access that individual has. If the individual was the web developer, same again, you disable access to the web backup and everything else, and just leave that person with access to the website hosting service, and then you can actually determine what sort of activities they're able to do with that level of access. It might just be to download and upload files. That's all they can do. So that certainly is a way that you can keep tight control of that. And the other good thing about that, and this would apply to many platforms, is that the login history is also tracked. So that business owner can jump in and he can look at a particular username and password and say, okay, I want to see when that person is logged in, maybe because something bad has happened, and then that is timestamped. It's also it also identifies the IP address and where they've logged in. So if the web developer is saying, yes, I'm a fantastic web developer and I do all this terrific work for you, Mr. Business Owner, and then the business owner logs in and sees that most of the logins are from an IP address in India, then he might know that it's just not quite as secure as he would like, and he may need to be able to address that. So there's certainly that capacity in a lot of systems to be able to have quite granular access levels for certain individuals that are really customised around the sort of activity that they need to do. And then the other level of security, you can introduce what is called multi-factor authentication, or very commonly two-factor authentication. And I know, Ray, this is kind of where you were heading. So certainly with Outlook email or Office 365 email, it's enabled in the system that you can elect to use two-factor authentication. And just for people that are listening, what that actually means is when you log in with your username and password, and then instead of letting you in, the system comes back and says, okay, we're now going to send a login code to your smartphone. And that could either be sent as a text message, or it could be sent to an authenticator app. In either case, you've got your smartphone, you either open the authenticator app or look at the text message, ping in that code as a secondary requirement before logging in, and that is a way the security system can confirm that you are who you are supposed to be. So we went back to that situation where somebody got my email address and my password for a service completely unrelated to my email service, but then a bad actor has come along, picked that up and said, I know this guy uses that particular email service, I'm going to see if I can get into the email service with this same username and password that he used over there. Then that is a situation where the two-factor authentication will stop that bad actor going any further. So that's a clear situation where, getting back to that immigration lawyer, the practice manager, if they had two-factor authentication in place when they were travelling, then they may not have been in a difficult situation that they were in.
So, gentlemen,
and to Doug's point, every major service today, from Facebook to Google to WordPress, they all allow for two-factor authentication, if not multi-factor, and I enabled them on all of them. The only guidance I give to people, other than enabling them, is to make sure that you have your backup codes. So whenever you enable multi-factor authentication, they give you a series of codes that, should you lose your phone or a mobile device where the Authenticator app is installed, well, you're locked out because it needs that code. Well, they give you a series of codes that you then back up. You need to print those on real paper and then put them in a water and fireproof safe place so that you're able to then log in should you ever lose your phone, or say when you change phones. This happens quite frequently with my clients. I get the phone call panicked because they have changed phones and now they can't log in because their multi-factor application was on their prior device. So I usually suggest having either, if you have two trusted devices, obviously having them on both of them, and or print those, either way, print those backup codes and save them someplace secure so that you have them in the event that you. It's not when it happens. It's not if. It's when you have to change a phone or those kinds of things. You're going to need to relog back in at some point. So those backup codes are really important.
Now, gentlemen, just to wrap up today, from both of you, what would you be saying to businesses are the things that they need to do now in order to be secure?
Well, I agree with Ray's point earlier, Ray, when you were saying password manager is your friend. The biggest security issue that I see small businesses having is just that very basic core security around passwords. They need to have a greater variety of passwords. They need to have different passwords for different services, and they will never achieve that without a password manager.
Right.
And to add on to Doug's thoughts, I would say, so to add on to Doug's thoughts, just two final thoughts here. Make sure that you have backups of your data. Today, especially with ransomware, that's when a bad actor or someone who's producing malware sends that code to your systems, grabs your data, secures it in an encrypted file, and then says, pay me in order to regain access to that data. And that could be your critical business data, that could be your website, it could be any number of things. So you want to make sure you have backups that you then save someplace securely so that should someone gain access to it, they can't get a ransom, paid for regaining access. So backups are really important. And the other is keep your software up to date. A lot of the security risks that we see across the internet today is really based on the fact that you have outdated software. There's a patch that's been pushed to your routers, to your mobile phone, to your operating system on your mobile phone, to an application on your mobile phone, or to an application on your computer or desktop, laptop, whatever. And since they're not updated, they haven't patched those security holes, and those risks remain open for you. So keep your backups secure and off your main computers that are traveling around, and keep your software up to date.
Totally agree. Thanks, Ray.
Okay. Thank you, gents. This has been a very interesting discussion. Next time we'll look at another issue, and until then, this has been Switched on IT. Thank you for your time, Doug.
Thanks, Barry.
And thank you, Ray. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Barry, and thanks to Doug for joining me as always.
No worries. Thanks very much. This has been Barry for Power TV Australia with the Switched on IT show. We'll see you again next week. Bye for now.